The Still Loading podcast is brought to you by the wonderful people on Patreon. Amazing people such as Stephen P., Gilmer, Kevin from the Bit by Bit Foundation, Ryan K., Eric H., Matt, aka Stormageddon, and Mr. Biscuits have all been wonderful enough to support the show over there. So if you would also like to get your name read at the beginning of an episode, along with a bunch of other goodies, go over to patreon.com/stillloadingpod and check out everything it has to offer. Before this episode of Still Loading begins, I wanted to give a quick content warning. There is subject matter discussed in this episode that deals with self-harm and suicide. There is a timestamp in the show notes for where that portion of the conversation begins. Listener discretion is advised. On this episode of Still Loading, 3 grown-ass adults sitting for hours on end talking about video games. This is the Still Loading podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today's episode, we are all waking from our deep slumbers to talk about, hopefully there's not going to be too many bad puns. We're not waking to do too many bad puns, but we're talking about Alan Wake, if you couldn't tell by the title, and my absolutely shitty pun that I probably will repeat numerous times throughout the episode. But we're here to talk about Alan Wake, the Remedy developed game back from 2010, and joining me to discuss all things that Alan Wake's up to is one returning guest. Well, technically, due to the way these episodes are coming out, both these wonderful people are returning guests, but one of their episodes has yet to air. So we're going to start off with the person who you have yet to hear on the show, Phil from Deleted Saves. Phil, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thank you for having me back on the episode, although you probably haven't heard me just yet. Who knows by the time this comes out?
This will be out before I already put it on Twitter, so I guess I can say we did an episode on the Order 1886. It will be out in October. I just recorded it super far in advance because it's for backlog month and I didn't want to, it was a lot of games to cover all at once. I want to record in advance. So that episode you'll hear in just another month or so, very, very shortly. Actually, when does it? I'll double check. It's very soon, though. It's extremely, extremely soon. So Phil, welcome back to the show. Well, for first time, second time, time is an illusion. But this other guest joining us, returning from the Super Mario Fantasy Draft, Matt, aka Stormageddon. Matt, how are you doing today?
Good. You misspoke. It's winner of the Super Mario Fantasy Draft.
That's correct.
I mean, that's the important bit. I am happy to be back. Thanks for having me. I basically, through your Twitch streams, bullied my way out of this podcast, which is kind of a pattern for me if you listen to other podcasts. So it worked out.
Yeah, if you listen to Matt's other guest spots, he does a lot of bullying, but it's all like bullying that we love. We love to be bullied by Matt. So this is it's a very interesting relationship with you.
Yeah. I think people just feel sorry for me, but I'll take it. I take what I can get.
I'll keep that in mind. Thanks.
Look, Phil, it works. So that's all I'm saying. I'm just saying.
I love it. Well, I'm happy to have you both on for this episode. I can't wait to talk about Alan Wake. And Alan Wake, it's at least according to the Wikipedia, it's described as an action adventure game, but I consider it more like an action horror game, like a story-driven action horror game. Would you both agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. The first time I played it, I was scared shitless by it. But the second time I played it on the remaster, less so. I think it's scary if you don't know what's coming, but once you have kind of an idea of what's happening, I mean, it is definitely a survival. It's like survival horror adjacent, I'd say, because the sequel, which we'll probably at least talk about a little bit, is a horror, like is very much like in the vein of Resident Evil survival horror. Whereas this one, I think, kind of floats in between, like just like an action adventure game and a survival game.
I would agree. I mean, this is my fault. I've been like inured to a lot of survival horror games because I played so many. So Alan Wake for me is definitely kind of what I would consider. Again, I would agree. It's sort of an action adventure game. It's sort of on the cusp of survival horror, but I kind of call it more of a thriller. Kind of like
Hmm.
one of those novels that you'd read where, you know, it's not straight up blood, guts, gore trying to scare the heck out of you. It's more like, ooh, what's going to happen to the hero next? We're not 100% sure, and we're not going to be sure that everyone makes out of it. So that's kind of where my thought is on this particular game. Its sequel, absolutely straight up survival horror.
It's a more of a, I guess, a supernatural thriller because there is like some supernatural shenanigans, which I guess maybe I shouldn't have said right off the top because I mean, I guess it's pretty heavily alluded to even from the very beginning. There's lots of weird stuff that happens. So there will be spoilers in this episode, y'all, just in case. It will start off with the gameplay, but we will be spoiling this just so you're aware. So if you do not want to be spoiled on Alan Wake, I recommend you go and play it and come back. But we will be talking about the gameplay for the most part first, but just in case any like subtle spoilers get snuck in there by accident, just wanted to give everyone a heads up. But yeah, we're going to be talking about Alan Wake for the next little bit. And yeah, this game came out originally in 2010. Actually, the earliest release was May 14th, 2010 in Europe. It came out on May 18th in North America, 2010, and Australia on May 20th, 2010. It obviously has been ported a handful of times. It was ported to Windows 2 years later. There's a remaster of it that came out on the Xbox One, PS4, PS5. A remaster in general for PC, and also there was one that came out for Switch, which I did not know. There was an Alan Wake remaster for Switch, came out 2 years ago almost. So yeah, it's been out for over a decade, and I finally got around to playing it. And I guess this is our time to talk about how we first experienced it, how we first kind of got into it. Matt, I'm going to start off with you. What kind of drew you to first trying this game in the first place, and what was your first when did you first experience it?
So to talk about that, I'll have to go a little further before it and talk about how I first got introduced to Remedy Entertainment. Growing up, I skipped over the Max Payne games. I'd always been curious about them, but never got around to playing them. Well, until recently, I remedied that this year. Get it? Remedy? Sorry. There'll be more of those. But back in the early days of the pandemic, because I believe Control came out like the February before the pandemic. And so like in the early days of the pandemic, when we were all home, I was looking for something to play. And I was like, you know what? I've heard great things about Control. I think it came out in 2020. I may be misspeaking, but it came out around that time, 2019, 2020. And I had never played it. I kept hearing how great it was. I knew it was by the same studio who had made Alan Wake, though I hadn't played Alan Wake at that point, but I was familiar with it. And I was like, you know what? Keep hearing this game is like basically the X-Files. So let me pick it up. And I became obsessed. And to this day, Control is one of my top 10 games of all time. I love that game a lot. And so after playing it, I read somewhere, this was before the Alan Wake DLC came out for Control. I read somewhere that it was a connected universe, that Control takes place in the same world as Alan Wake, and they're working on DLC for it. And I think there were like a little like text-based hints like in the game too, like files and stuff you could find. And so it's like, oh well, I mean, if I liked Control, I might as well play Alan Wake. And I'd just gotten it on the Epic Store. It was one of the free games. And I was like, you know what? It's Halloween. It's October. It's spooky. Let's play some Alan Wake. And so I ended up streaming the whole game. I think it took like 5 sessions, maybe 4 or 5 sessions, because I played for 2 to 3 hours each time, and loved it. I fell in love with it. I loved the ridiculousness of it. I loved the narration, the Stephen King vibes. It was the right amount of cheesy and sincere. And just scary enough, and I was still a noob. I hadn't really played a lot of survival horror at that point, except for I think I'd played Dead Space already. So I ended up playing it on the Epic Store on PC and really loving it. And have now since, of course, played all the DLC for Control and Alan Wake 2, and I'm pretty much a devoted Remedy sicko. I said I played Max Payne 1 and 2 earlier this year. I have Quantum Break, though I haven't touched it yet, but I'm excited for that as well. And so I've been obsessed with the Remedyverse ever since. I love connected universes. It's why I never tire of the MCU, even if it's not at its best sometimes, because I like interconnected stories that way. And so, I've kind of been obsessed with it ever since.
All right, all right. I'm kind of similar to you, where like when I first played it, like, well, this year I should say, um, I'm not big into horror games either, so Alan Wake was kind of like an early foray is kind of an early foray into horror games for me, so I can kind of understand where you're coming from with that. You said you'd only play Dead Space up at this point?
Yeah, I mean, now I've played, like, I'm officially a horror fan. I blame Dave Jackson, mutual friend of the show, for that, because he also within the last few years has become a more devoted horror fan. But like, I've now played a bunch of horror games, I started Resident Evil 2 remake. I've played Resident Evil 4 remake and the original. I've played Iron Lung. I played a bunch of stuff, but back when I played Alan Wake 1, I was still very new to it, so it scared the bejesus out of me. Not so much when I replayed it recently on the remaster, but the first time through, I was just constantly terrified of everything around me.
I can understand that entirely. But before I go into my own experiences, Phil, I'm going to throw it over to you. What's your experience with Alan Wake?
Oh, well, this is I have to go back a little bit in time here because I actually did play it when it came out in 2010. I'm a little on the old side, sorry. Um, I had my 360, and that's why I played it on, was my Xbox 360. I actually bought it for two reasons. One, I needed something to fill the gap between Dead Space 1 and Dead Space 2. Dead Space 2 I think came out in 2011. It wasn't out yet. So I needed something to like kind of fill the gap. Um, but I also needed something to kind of take the edge off the fact that I was playing like ridiculous amounts of Fallout New Vegas, and I needed something shorter to like take the edge off because otherwise I was spending
Hmm.
too much time in the wasteland. Um, I'd kind of gotten the idea that about Remedy because I had played Max Payne 1 on computer many, many years ago. I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun. But I hadn't really kind of touched anything that Remedy had made since then. And I think it actually might have been Game Informer where I first heard about Alan Wake coming out. And
Hmm.
I think The Escapist and a couple of the things I was trying to keep up on the various, and they all kind of said, hey, this is coming out. This might be, you know, something sort of in that genre. So I looked into it and I said, okay, this looks pretty good. I'll get a copy. And I did. And honestly, I started playing it and I fell in love with it. Now, like I said, I have something of a weird and deep connection to this particular game. I've talked about it on my own show. I did an episode about it, and it's, I think, the only episode I've gotten so far where people have actually contacted me and said, I never intended to cry at the end of a review of Alan Wake, you son of a bitch. Um, but I ended up, because of a couple things that happened at the same time, I ended up developing this weird connection with the character of Alan Wake for, I think, not only, again, cheesiness, but also its sincerity, a certain level of honesty, and just kind of, I liked the way that it played. I liked the way it
Hmm.
used the setting, the concept, the supernatural horror that didn't need to be in your face, but was definitely something driving the character forward, and I just really liked it.
I'm very curious as to like I'll have to go back and listen to that episode now, because I'm very curious as to like what about Alan Wake kind of became such a strong emotional connection to you, or helped you develop that strong emotional connection.
It'll probably come up as the episode goes on, depending on where I go. So be prepared.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And rest in peace, Game Informer. You like at the time we're recording this, the announcement of Game Informer closing is less than a week old, which is still saddening. Anyway, not to dwell on the doom and gloom, but still is a bummer. for my own experience with this, I remember my friend Tristan, who's been on the show, who was on the show years ago. I actually should get him back on at some point. He was playing this, and I remember being kind of interested watching him playing it. He said he was really hooked on it. So then I gave it a shot. I bought it and I downloaded it and I played maybe about 60 minutes. And that was back when, like, I don't know, I guess I just could not finish a game. I remember I would start a lot of games and then I would never get far in them. It would be like, okay, that was cool. I got an idea of what this game is like. Let's move on to something else. And that's how I would play games for a long time. It wasn't until I started this show that I actually started playing games and really trying to analyze them and dive into them. And I've been enjoying games more actually because of this show, which is nice. Though sometimes it is frustrating, as I'm sure you both can attest to. Sometimes you just want to play a game that's not for content, and like then you feel guilty. I'm like, well, I'm using all this time, and when I could be using it for the show or something like that.
Wait. People play games for fun? I don't
What are you
understand.
talking about? thank goodness that I like the podcast is still, because if I hated the podcast, holy shit.
Yeah.
That, I mean, that would be insane. That, I mean, I've been doing it for 10 years, but I played it then. I actually played it originally with no intention to do an episode on it this year, but when I was like looking ahead on my schedule, I'm like, well, I don't have anything planned for this, and I actually just beat Alan Wake, and this is kind of close to October. Like, this won't be out in October, but it's going to be out close to October-ish. And now I'm going to actually have to double check, when did I schedule this to come out, because I don't remember off the top of my head. It might come out in August or in September. I'm not entirely sure, but in any case, that's how I first experienced the game, and I really enjoyed my time with it. Spoiler alert: I really did enjoy my time with this, and this episode will be out in September. So there we go, just a month shy of Spooky Month. So there we go. But let's dive into the game now. Let's dive into the gameplay. And actually, wait, before we do that, just a couple tidbits of background info on Alan Wake. I found this amazing interview that Sam Lake did. Sam Lake seems like such a good dude.
Yeah, I want that to be true. And it seems like it is from the people I know who have met him, because he does absolutely just seem delightful.
Mm-hmm. Seems very down to earth, and that's awesome. He did this interview on Ars Technica on their YouTube channel for War Stories. Have either of you ever watched any of the War Stories videos?
I'm not.
I
saying
have,
no.
yeah.
Definitely worth checking out if you have not. Both this one as well as, like, they have tons of other stuff over there. It's great, but this, what I didn't realize about Alan Wake is that during the development of this, they had to scrap this game like 3 years into development. They had to scrap not almost everything. They had to start over from a lot of it. It wasn't completely from scratch, but essentially Alan Wake was supposed to be an open world game initially, because when Sam Lake first got started, well, little bit of backstory on Sam Lake. He got into writing for games by accident. He was studying English at the at Helsinki University. His friend, who was also a co-founder of Remedy, Petri Jarviletto, asked him to write some text for the first Remedy game, Death Rally, and he ended up working on Max Payne, and Max Payne was kind of like their breakout hit. And then after decompressing from the crunch that Max Payne 2, excuse me, they wanted to create a new IP, and that's kind of how Alan Wake started. Sam wanted to dive deeper into storytelling, and he kind of liked the idea of formatting the game like it was episodic TV, which is why, as we play through Alan Wake, it goes through it by episodes, and heavily inspired by Stephen King and Twin Peaks, which is very apparent, and Twilight Zone. You can see a lot of those influences in in pretty much everywhere in this game. It's oozing out from the sides. There's so much influence of that. They wanted to make Alan Wake an open world game, like a free roaming open world game, and keep a cinematic style, kind of like Max Payne, but go open world. They had the light versus dark motif that you see throughout the gameplay was there from the beginning, but you would actually have to, you would spend the daytime. They were going to have a full day and night cycle, and you would spend the daytime like doing all your preparations for all the fights that were about to happen at nighttime, because that's when all the shadows would come out. And in early versions of the game, there, in parts of the story, Wake's wife, they go to a cabin in a place on an island in a place called Cauldron Lake, and that Cauldron Lake was originally going to have a volcano erupting, which would explain why they were going to have the whole town empty, and that volcano erupting is why everyone would have been gone. Which also would be this like portal to like some supernatural darkness would come from, and they also had some ideas for enemies where like they're like some well actually, you know what, I'll get into that when we talk about the gameplay, what some of the scrapped gameplay ideas would be. But a lot of the elements that you would see, like the light switch object that is like a prominent story symbol, or a symbol within the story, that was even in the early designs of the game. And yeah, there was a whole lot to do with it, and there was a whole lot of stuff like that initially, and it was getting hard to manage. They were running over time and over budget, and Microsoft Studios even came in to help the struggling Remedy kind of like finish up the game. But as Sam like put it, it was too many cooks in the kitchen, and they were missing so many deadlines. So they revamped everything entirely from what they had started with, and they kept the open world map, but then instead of keeping it an open world gameplay, they would basically take sections of it, be like, all right, this is going to be a single level experience. This area here is going to be a single level experience, which I think actually worked out in their favor, because even though that wasn't their intention, it kind of helped create the whole feeling of, Bright Falls feeling a lot more connected. It felt a lot more fleshed out, even though it was single player level, like linear single player levels. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Yeah, I'd say that's a fair assessment.
Let me see if there's anything else on here. I think that's all I really had for some quick fun facts on the development. But I found it interesting that they had to basically start over fresh. And actually, before they came up with the iteration of the game that we know and love now, they pared down the entire team. It was pretty much all the the department heads gathered together for 2 months, and they just completely went over every single aspect of the game and detailed how it was going to fix it. Sam Lake described it as mad scientists in a lab with papers taped all over the walls and notes all over them, and that's kind of where the final form of the game took shape. So a little bit of a hectic development cycle, to say the least, but the game obviously did come out in 2010 and did pretty well. I mean, I would say so. It got a sequel. I've not played the sequel. You said you both have?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And you said it's more of like a horror.
It is
survival.
absolutely a survival horror game. It's
Oh, yeah.
terrifying. Scared the absolute shit out of me constantly, but I loved it. It was a blast to play. But like jump scares, creepy stuff. Yeah. It fully leaned into the like Resident Evil remake style horror with it's over the shoulder. The combat's not as great as a Resident Evil game, but it's still, yeah, it's absolutely way more scary than this game or any other game.
Oh yeah, I definitely, even for someone like I said myself who's been in this game a while for horror, there were more than a few times the game got me. There was a couple times like something had happened and I just blind fire into it down a hallway and like, well, now I'm down ammo. Oops.
Oh man, I don't know if I'm going to want to play it now. I'm a scaredy boy. I don't know. I don't know if I can handle that. I've tried Resident Evil remake, and man, that like I couldn't even get through it.
Yeah, then this might be rough for you. Then again, I was a coward, and I still got to be clear, I was scared, and this blew my mind when I heard someone else say it. But you can be a fan of horror and be a coward. Like it's allowed, and so that kind of like just clicked something in my brain. I went, "Oh, I can play these games and be scared, and it still means I'm a fan of them." So yeah, I mean. But it is rough. There's a section particularly in like the third act that like I don't know how I got through.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's true. You can absolutely be a fan of horror and still be afraid and still be quote unquote a coward. I would rather trust somebody who is absolutely scared rather than someone who's trying to be like, Mr. Warrior wandering in going, "I'm the toughest thing you've ever seen." No, that's not how it is. So you don't have to not be afraid. You might get used to it, but it doesn't ever leave you.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll try it at some point because I did really enjoy my time with this first game here, but I'm a little scared to try out something straight up horror. But we'll see. We'll see. So that's all the stuff I had for the development history. Do either of you have anything you'd like to add to kind of like fun facts about the development of the game? Anything that you want to touch on at all?
I think it's a fun fact that there are a lot of characters in these games, in this game particularly, but a lot of Remedy games also, that has a facial voice actor, like a mocap actor, and a voice actor. Like the titular Alan Wake is voiced by Matthew Peretta, but is facially and bodily played by Ilka Villi, and
Mm.
they do that a lot. I mean, I think of Max Payne famously was voiced by someone different from the face, which was Sam Lake's face, and so things like that. And now it's killing me that James McCaffrey, that's who it is. James
Mm.
McCaffrey who's the voice of Max Payne, and also Trench in Control and a bunch of other stuff. He was the voice of Max Payne, and then the face was Sam Lake, and then someone else in the second game. And so like they do that a lot, the studio, and I like that. I think it's kind of cool to like split a character into those two things. It makes for interesting, especially like in Alan Wake 2, when like they have all those live action FMV scenes, which they have some of in here, but most of the FMV scenes in this game are just on the TV during Night Springs or when Alan is talking to himself through the TV. But I love that use of FMV.
That is kind of cool. Sorry, go ahead, Phil.
No, I don't have really fun facts. I have a fact that I didn't like. Last couple days, just to refresh myself, I watched someone do a playthrough of it on YouTube of the remaster, and I realized late in the game that they, in fact, I think it was, you said James McCaffrey is his name, the voice of Max Payne, actually is in Alan Wake at some point. I had totally forgot. Just all of a sudden, I heard it in the background, and I went, "Wait a second, that's Max Payne talking to Alan in one of his dream sequences." Oh my god! Like I said, it's silly, but it had sort of like a mind blowing effect. Like I just realized, however many years later, that Max Payne's voice actor, was in Alan Wake 1. It's a short piece of dialogue, but you will miss it if you're not paying attention or don't realize it. I will say though, I will give not only Alan Wake, but a lot of the Remedyverse, they really do go all out, especially with the little side content stuff, like the Night Springs TV show, or even stuff in Control where they do like little puppet shows and things like that. I have to give them props for being willing to go all out creatively and add those extra bits in that most companies probably wouldn't do or would ignore, but just to make the world feel a little bit more fleshed out.
You're so right, Phil. Like one of the things that really impressed me with this game is just the attention to detail. Like you were saying, how they went above and beyond with like all the little extra stuff, the live action segment, like specifically, like I would actually the night is it what's the fake TV show that's
Night Springs.
Night
Night
Springs.
Springs.
When you would come across them, that I was just surprised at how much effort they put into what effectively is just world building. Like they didn't have to do all that. Like you can sit there and watch like a 4 to 5 minute long quote unquote episode of this fictional TV show where they have a full plot. Like they actually there's a beginning, middle, and end to these episodes. It's not like you just see a little bit and now a commercial break and then like static. They could have easily done that just to kind of keep with the vibe, but no, they did the entire thing.
Yeah, they went ahead and made like flash fiction essentially and recorded it. And flash fiction's hard to do because you got about like, they consider it like less than 1,000 words, sometimes less than 100, and that's not easy to do.
It's crazy. Like I really enjoyed those aspects of the game, and just like even there's a moment later on in the game where you kind of have like your own rock and roll concert kind of, and even something like that, like it's all done via gameplay in that instance, but there's a lot of things from like, well, they wrote a whole song for this too. And
don't even get me started on the music in this game. Like the brilliance of like, I could just gush about Remedy for hours. Poets of the Fall are an incredible metal band that I was sort of a fan of, but who I am a fan of are the Old Gods of Asgard, which are a fictional band played by the real band Poets of the Fall, and have done songs for Alan Wake Control and Alan Wake 2. And they are, as far as the world is concerned, actual songs by these bands. And then those characters end up being pivotal, like the band members end up being pivotal characters in the narrative of this game as well. And that I love that kind of meta nonsense. I'm a fan of Sex Bomb from Scott Pilgrim versus the World. I love that kind of stuff in storytelling. And so just chef's kiss.
And speaking of meta stuff, this whole one of the things that Sam pointed out in the war stories, and I felt stupid that I didn't realize when I played it, is that this whole game is a meta narrative of the struggle of coming up with a sequel to a popular series.
Correct.
Because Alan Wake is, for backstory for the story, the backstory for the narrative, that's a better way to phrase it. Backstory for the narrative, Alan Wake is a struggling writer who created a really popular detective series, Max Payne, cough cough. It's not called Max Payne, but that's essentially what it is. He kills off his character because he's kind of done with it and he wants to start something new, but then he's experiencing writer's block trying to create a new IP. Similarly to what happened to Alan, Remedy finished Max Payne 2. We're like, we want to make a new IP. And then they had some development issues with trying to figure out what exactly would make this new IP stand out from their previous works. And it's kind of funny that it almost feels like when it's something that self-referential, that meta, sometimes I cringe at that type of thing, but this felt so sincere. If it genuinely felt like Sam Lake and their team at Remedy was like, it was them just trying to work through their writer. This game was them trying to work through their own writer's block to create this game. It was really, I feel like if someone else did it, it wouldn't come off as sincere. It would come off as more cringy, but it kind of works in this context.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the meta-ness of it is what makes a lot of Remedy games successful. I mean, if you ever get to Quantum Break, it had a TV show that was meant to be watched while playing the game. And unfortunately it didn't really work from what I've heard. I'm still planning on experiencing it at some point, but meta narratives have kind of, I think, been ingrained in Remedy since the very early days. I mean, even the storytelling in the Max Payne games, there are radio shows that you can hear and little scenes that you can see as well. They also do the TV trick. I think that's they just like world building. And I think because the world building is so strong and has this meta narrative, it works really well to not only bolster the game, but the franchises that they've been building.
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes we also see in Alan Wake, for those of you who know kind of where to look at this stuff, you can see parallels with not only Wake the character as a writer, but a lot of real world authors. In a lot of cases, even the concept of the Alex Casey character, which I mean is Max Payne, but they can't officially deal with the name. Look at author James Patterson. He's written or co-authored or overseen at this point hundreds of novels, many of whom have been some in thriller, detective, and stuff like that. Movies have been made about them. Studios have hounded him. When is the next popular book in this ultra popular series of yours going to come out? And sometimes just having to turn around and go, personally, I am done with it. I have to separate myself. If someone else wants to take over the reins, you go right ahead, but I need to do something new. And he's not the only author. There are many out there who've gone through this. But Alan Wake as a character also goes through that stage of, I hit absolute pay dirt with this thing, but I want to do something else, but now I'm stuck. What do I do?
And I feel like at the time this came out, like a lot of games that do meta stuff, I feel like it's almost done with snarky. It's done very tongue in cheek. There's a lot of snarkiness to it. Maybe a little bit of I don't want to say pessimism. That's too strong of a word, but I'm thinking of the Stanley Parable and stuff like that, where it's trying to call on the nature of are you playing the game or is the game playing you? Look how meta we're being. And if what you were saying, Matt, and what you were saying, Phil, and kind of all the self-referential and reflective and meta nature of the Remedy games, it in tying back to what I said before, it's a genuine meta. Like, it's not trying to like pull one over on you. You know, it's not trying to make you the player feel like embarrassed or ashamed, or it's not trying to make fun of you. It's not trying to poke fun at anything. It's just they're having fun. They like this idea of a connect, almost kind of like how Kevin Smith created the Askew universe, where like if you see, you know, Clerks and Mallrats, they're connected, but you wouldn't know unless you paid attention to the dialogue. It's just because, you know, they reference same people existing in this fictional version of New Jersey. And I feel like Remedy kind of does that in like a video game way, and not in a comedic way either. But or maybe they do. I don't know. This is the only Remedy game I've played. I still have to play Max Payne and Control and all the others. But I don't know. I like that. I like that it's not like a kind of poking fun at the player type of meta. It's just a very sincere meta narrative, which I kind of respect for them pulling off.
Yeah, totally. I think the sincerity is what makes it work. It's what makes a lot of their stories work. Is that they believe in what they believe in the story they're telling. Right? It's not, they're not trying to be like, when they do have moments of comedy and levity in this game and other games, but they're not trying to be funny per se, like in the like campy way that horror movies are campy. Like Barry is funny in this, in the sense that he is that kind of loud, boisterous kind of agent type that you see in stereotypical things. And so like I think they ride that line really well. And it I think it really does come down to incredible voice performance and excellent writing.
And again, they're enough grounded in the real world where you can understand the metafiction. There's a lot of reference without being a direct, like having to call out like, hey, you know, Verizon, you know, phones hired us, so we got to plug that in our game or something like that. But they are experiencing enough of the real world despite these supernatural elements that they ride a line between that sense you get if you read like urban fantasy, where it's like, you know, there's a real world and I'm a hard-boiled detective and there's elves hiding in the background and I can cast magic. It's like, okay, you're right, you're really going off back into like, you know, George R. R. Martin territory here. Let's pull it back. There's obviously something going on, something more than the mundane world, but they're able to pull it off with, as you said, a sincerity, a sticking to the fiction, sticking the taking the real world and being able to mold it enough that it's believable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think, like, I know we keep saying the word sincere, but I think there's an that's an underrated trait, I think, of narratives in any media. It doesn't even have to be games, but you know, you think about like comedies. If a comedy is trying too hard to be funny, then it doesn't feel funny. But when they're playing their jokes off as sincere, and the characters really believe it, then that those jokes hit home a lot more. And the same thing even with like some of the more things, it's like pulp fiction-y type of movies like Indiana Jones. Like, it's, if you didn't have all the characters in those movies believing everything, being sincere in their performance, that could easily just come off as this cheesy kind of pulpy action adventure, and it wouldn't come off as this, instead of being this like really incredibly fun dynamic movie. And I feel like that is like, I feel like media doesn't take that as much into account, or people don't talk about that as much when stories are being portrayed or worlds are being created, like the sincerity of keeping everything in line and being 100% true to what you have written. Doesn't mean that's always going to work. Obviously, if you write a shitty narrative, then it doesn't matter how, then you're just sincere to a shitty narrative. But like that's on a game by game basis, or media by media basis.
Right.
Let's move on to the gameplay a little bit. I wasn't expecting to kind of go into something like this, like the meta narrative, but I like that. I was expecting to go into that during the story segment, but I think that's kind of a good way to highlight for those who haven't played it, like what this game is going to kind of entail for them if they want to give it a shot. And then, speaking of learning more about the game, we should probably talk about the gameplay. We've been dancing around that for a little bit. I've teased it like 6 times and keep switching topics. So, you know, I'm a great host. I know what I'm doing. We can move on to the gameplay finally. I want to throw it over to you first, Phil. What are your thoughts on the gameplay? Like, what did you like about it? What did you not like about it? Just kind of, and feel free to describe how the game works a little bit as well, if you so choose.
Absolutely. The biggest thing, of course, with this is the concept of light and dark. Alan himself references throughout the game that it's the world of darkness versus the world of light. It's brought up in other pieces of the story, but it's really kind of integral to how the game plays. Your constant, and it's not a weapon, but your constant tool. And I think we kind of get used to this in modern horror games that take place in the dark, that someone's just going to have a flashlight so you can actually see what the hell's going on, where you're going. But in Alan Wake, it's critical to actually making sure that the enemies are vulnerable to your um, rather common arms. Flashlights will become your best friend. You can't defeat the enemies until you hold a flashlight on them for a certain amount of time to allow the sort of shield of darkness that is open over them to break so that you can actually affect them with bullets.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like Alan's not a soldier. It's the same deal with Harry Mason from the first Silent Hill. These men aren't soldiers. A lot of our survival horror games that we deal with, or horror adjacent games, the main character has military training, or they have police training, or they have some kind of, I know what a gun is, I can pick it up, boom, 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 and get headshots all day long. Alan's not like that. He even says in the game, I didn't own a gun until like a week ago. I didn't pick up a gun. And that's the thing, is you've just got what you expect, because where this game takes place is in the Pacific Northwest, roughly the Pacific Northwest. Could be anywhere from Seattle to Portland. We don't really know. It's assumed Washington, but could be anywhere. So what you would loot: hunting rifles, shotguns to keep bears and large deer out,
Mm-hmm.
revolvers. It's not this massive arsenal of high explosives and fully automatic weapons. There's not calling in a helicopter with a gunship, anything like that. But the flashlight is critical. And I mean anything like flares, flashlight, anything that will keep the darkness at bay. It's really integral in how you begin to manipulate light, not just to see, but as a weapon against the
Mm-hmm.
darkness. Um, the gunplay almost becomes secondary at that point. A lot of it is light for exploration. There's also times as you're exploring the environment, you're going to find fluorescent paint left all over the place by who knows, some person. It's kind of hinted at who it may be, but it's not never made exactly clear, to help you find where you should be going. If there's any spare treasure around that you can find, anything like that. The manuscript pages just tell more of the story. Along the way, you'll collect little manuscript pages of the story Alan wrote that is coming to life. That's world building. It fills in. Otherwise, by and large, excuse me, it is exactly what you think. It is a third-person action game with horror elements. Alan controls well enough. He's not tank controls, but it's not like a third person over the shoulder. He's not like a Leon Kennedy in
Mm-hmm.
RE4 or something like that. Um, he's easy to navigate, and a lot of it also you have to dodge. He's not, again, a soldier, so if a maniac comes out of the woods screaming, babbling, swinging an axe at him, you got to duck and get out of the way and give yourself distance until you can flashlight him enough to be able to shoot him. An interesting mechanic they do in this game, because Remedy likes to do this: how you refill health. Obviously, in
Mm-hmm.
Max Payne, we have painkillers. He's just popping pills to, make him be, you know, able to move. Alan's case, you have to find like a street light somewhere to stand under.
Mm-hmm.
So you just wait there until Alan's health refills under this light. Now, enemies can't hurt you, they can't approach you, but at the same time, you just kind of watch them circling you like wolves, unless you've cleared them out. And that is not something we see too often in games. I mean, we've seen a lot of other games that have alternate, like, you didn't pick up a first aid kit, or you didn't have an injectable or something like that. There's an alternate way to get your health back. But this one is really on theme with what Remedy was doing with the thought of light and dark.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's very few times, I shouldn't say very few. I I love it when a game is able to incorporate its gameplay mechanics as a part of the story, or like have it reinforce the narrative. And that's what the whole light and dark mechanic, because we haven't talked about the story yet, we'll get to that, but that is a major part of the story, the light versus the dark, the light, the shadow world versus the our world. And this, every single aspect of the gameplay just continuously reinforces that. And like you said, Phil, how like it by having the light be a way to heal you, it kind of creates this interesting, like, there's like almost moments of like risk reward where you have those like, I apologize if you already brought it up, but the what is it, the generators, right, where you have to start up,
Yeah. Hmm.
and then you have to choose, like, okay, well, there's a bunch of monsters coming at me, do I try to like trust my skill to start up this generator quickly enough to turn the light on before they get to me? Because even if they don't kill you, which they usually won't within one hit, it still is impossible to start it up if they're going to keep attacking you. So you really have to like hope that you're good enough to get it on the first try or so.
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
Lots of fun moments like that. Before I take any of Matt's points, I want to throw it over to you, Matt. Any thoughts on the gameplay?
It's rough. Um, I love this game for its narrative, its acting, its world building, but the combat is aggravating to me at times.
Mm,
When I played the remaster, I had a better sense, and like upon replays, I kind of grok it a little better. But it's definitely rough. It definitely feels like an Xbox 360 game. Just kind of how rigid the controls are. The dodge is not good, like full stop. It can be successful, but it's not the same kind of dodge that you'd get in a more snappier game, modern game.
mm,
Hmm.
um and I love the light mechanic, and I love that you have to shine the light and to expose the demon underneath the darkness and then shoot it to kill it. Like, I love that combo. But I just feel like it's a little janky in this game. Again, I don't think it's unplayable on any level, but the gameplay is not what I come back to this game for. It's the story and the world. I do wish that in the remaster they tightened up the controls a little. As far as I could tell, they didn't. But it was prettier. Definitely, they sharpened the graphics a bit and upresed it. But yeah, I think that the broad way it works into the narrative, like Phil had said, also I think is really great. I think that it is probably the best they could do with the time they had and the constraints within they were working on. you know that said, I don't love the combat in Alan Wake 2 either. It's better than this game, though. But I think that it's the thing that's aged the poorest about this game. As much
Hmm.
as I do love it and I'm a fan, new players coming into this, if they're not expecting a little bit of janky control, they might get frustrated, because also there's like moderate amounts of platforming, not a ton, but the jumps aren't great either. And now again, that also plays into what Phil was saying about he's not a soldier, he's an older guy who's a writer who sits on his ass a lot, right? So like the
Hmm.
jumps being awkward, the dodge being awkward, the shooting being less than precise, that's all intentional. I'm almost completely positive. But it does make for a challenging gameplay, in my opinion.
Hmm. Now, admit it also, and I can't disagree with any of that. It's still, I think, even in the 360 days, there were games that controlled a little bit snappier, but I
Yeah,
don't think, you know, precise control is really what Remedy goes for. They're obviously a
right.
storytelling system. And I would also say, if anyone's not used to it, as I said, he's not a soldier. Expect that when you make Alan sprint, after a little while, he is going to slow down, and you're going to have somebody breathing in your ear the entire time, as it
oh,
sounds like
that's so
somebody's trying to
annoying.
catch their breath.
Yeah.
And like, I just ran a mile, and I'm trying to soliloquy here, and like, Alan, shut up and just take a breath, please. Dear God, you sound like you're an asthmatic. Please stop.
Definitely someone who's been sitting down for at least a decade just writing books. You can definitely hear
And
that in the
and
performance.
may or may not have a 3-pack a day habit.
That Yeah, that too. I I didn't have quite as many issues with the combat as you, Matt. I didn't hate it, but you are right, it's a little janky. Especially like the dodge you were talking about. I didn't it's weird because when you said it, I'm like, was the dodge really that bad? And then I was thinking back on it. It was about 50-50 for me. 50% of the time, I'm like, okay, I was able to get away from the enemy, no problem, sprint off, do something else, no big deal. But then there'd be other times I would hit the dodge button, and then it would take a minute to dodge, or it would dodge into another enemy because you don't really have any crazy good control of how Alan dodges. So when I started thinking back, and I'm like, I guess Matt's right. You really don't have a lot of control over the dodge. You kind of do. It's like you have a general direction Alan can dodge towards, and that's about it. Um, and in terms of like the actual combat part, it took me a little bit to get used to. I do think some of the pacing in the game is pretty slow for the most part, and not in a bad way. I think that actually works with the narrative. But they usually don't throw a whole lot of enemies at you. But when they do, I almost feel like they don't do a good enough job of giving you the resources needed all the time to get through it. Because like most of the game, I don't have to worry about resources. Like if you're going to do survival horror, which they don't, it's meant to be an action adventure game, then like you kind of have to pick a lane, and it feels like the harder encounters become almost survival horror in a sense because your resources are more limited than you'd like them to be, and the game doesn't do anything to kind of teach you to be sparing with your ammo because they give a decent amount to you as you go through. But I'm thinking specifically of like the rock concert, and there's a couple other moments like when you get at the what's the psychologist's name? Do you remember his
Phil
name?
Hartman.
Wait, is it actually Phil Hartman?
I thought so. It's Dr. Hartman. I don't
It's
remember
Dr.
what his
Hartman,
first name
yeah.
is.
I
Yeah.
forget the first name though.
I was like,
Yeah.
Phil Hartman, SNL,
No,
Emil
no.
Hartman, Emil
Emil
Hartman.
Hartman. There it is. Yeah.
I was close. You pretty like you're
I
two
got
letters
it.
off.
Yeah.
Phil Hartman, that's funny. Wasn't he was in the shout out to SNL? He wasn't he the dad in the Van Down by the River sketch?
Yes, he was.
I
Yeah.
Mhm.
thought so. I thought
And
so.
of course, I
I
think he
know he's
wasn't he the voice of Troy McClure on the
He
Simpsons or
was.
something like that? Yeah.
Yeah, he sure was.
rest in peace, Phil Hartman. We don't need to go into that's a tragic story. If you want to be sad, listeners, look up Phil Hartman. Um, anyway, so yeah, so at Hartman's clinic, you go back there later on in the game, and you have to escape from it, and it's like it's getting destroyed. And there's like a segment after you get outside of the clinic, and there's like a courtyard area. You go through this little maze, which I actually love the maze. Like it's creepy, but in a good way. And then there's a section right once you get out of the maze, and there's like a small group of enemies that pop up, and it just doesn't feel like you have enough resources to take them out. Like you have to be really strategic. And that juxtaposition of never having to worry about your ammo, then all of a sudden, oh god, I'm running low on ammo, it doesn't, it's incongruous. I don't think it 100% works. If you're going to go for survival horror, do survival horror things, kind of like what Last of Us, you mentioned Last of Us 2 off mic, Phil, kind of like what Last of Us does, where it's trying, whether, I don't know, I think it does pretty good at survival horror, but you feel actually, as a quick side tangent, do you think it does okay with the survival horror element, Phil?
Ugh, um, well, I do have a problem with it in gameplay. As you were saying, there are several points in the game. The maze outside the clinic is one of them. The rock concert's one of them. There's a scene where you have to climb Mirror Peak, like following what you believe to be your wife's kidnapper, where they don't do siege battles well, where it's
Yeah,
very clear
that's
that
it.
you have to
That's
hold
definitely it.
off an attacking wave or two waves or three waves. And Alan Wake doesn't let you stockpile ammo and batteries and stuff. They will tell you like you're out of space, no more, no more. And there are times where it's not scary, it's more frustrating because, as you said, you're running out of resources all of a sudden. You can only drop so many flares and so many bullets and burn through so many batteries before you're sitting here going, God, these waves aren't stopping, and these dudes are, and it's not like the little guys who like, and the flashlight is not an instant thing. You have to hold it on for a couple seconds, and you'll hear it. You'll see the beam narrow down on them, and you'll hear it like making this god awful like screeching noise until they pop like a balloon, and then you can hurt them. And they have like two types of enemy. They have average guy, and then they have big dude, and the big dudes take longer and they take more
Mm-hmm.
resources to dispatch. And after a while, it's not scary when it's frustrating. And if you die in a fight and you have to reload, forget it. The tension's gone. You have
Mm-hmm.
to. It's tension is not. Tension is scary. Frustration is not. If you've played the same fight over and over again, and like, oh, I got stuff jumping out of the woods at me, and there's monsters in the vents and stuff, but you've done it 3 or 4 times, forget it. You're not scared anymore. You're just like pissed. You're just like, fine, I'm going to walk up on this place like the Terminator and wipe everybody out and continue on. Maybe that sense of horror will come back. It does well, but it's in the dark forest and you get like 3 or 4 enemies chasing you and you have to make a speedy decision. Where do I need to go? Can I fall back and take these guys out? When it's a siege fight, no, the combat system falls right apart.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are your thoughts, Matt? Do you think it does any, like, on the thoughts of kind of like the survival? I guess it's actually siege is what I was trying to say, but like the siege elements of the game.
I mean, they're awful. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like Phil was saying, you end up overwhelmed and frustrated beyond anything else. I think that this game tells a really good narrative, but the combat doesn't really add to the narrative, which is part of it. I think it's additive in the sense that Alan Wake's just an average dude and is not good at combat, which adds to like some of he's kind of hapless narrative, and just kind
Mm-hmm.
of trying to get by. And so the smaller combat sections are great for that, for the scene setting. But all of the big, like, with the exception of the rock concert, which I won't go into more detail about that quite yet, but with the exception of the rock concert, all the others are just awful. Like the helicopter, the clinic, all of those.
Oh yeah, the helicopter too. That's another one.
I just think they're more frustrating than fun. When it's in small doses, it's mostly fun and not super frustrating. But the game throws enough like boss battle size fights at you, even though there are no real boss mobs per se. I mean, I think actually the most frustrating section in the entire game. I like that the darkness can possess inanimate objects and they fly at you, and you have to use the flashlight to slow them down and make them disappear, to like depossess them. But there's a section on a bridge that you're like going across an entire bridge. You have you can't, like, you don't have a gun, and you maybe only have a few flares or flashbangs, but for most part you've got your flashlight. You just have to avoid things flying at you and then depossess them with the flashlight. And it's just, if you die at any point, you like go all the way back to the beginning of the bridge. Like the checkpoint is really far along, like stuff like that. Also very frustrating doing it in small doses. Like fighting the only boss fight per se I like is when you fight the construction equipment. That one is kind of fun, because it's just the one thing you're fighting for most of it. Then a few guys come out, but for the most part it's pretty isolated. But at any other time it just felt like easily overwhelming and often
Mm-hmm.
frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I think what we've been kind of getting at too with all of our thoughts on this is like, at least, okay, I shouldn't say I'll speak for myself. I think this game has a lot of promise in how it does the combat, especially because its combat and its gameplay is really well, like, immersed in, or like connected to the narrative, and I really like that. And it's just frustrating to see how, like, there's, like, you can see how this could work, like if they did, if they kind of fixed maybe some of the either resource distribution, especially for the siege moments, or they kind of fixed maybe even like the controls a little bit. Like, I actually think the pacing of the combat isn't awful. I think if they would have put a little bit more care into the controls, where like you don't, like, especially with the flashlight, unless that's supposed to add to the horror elements, I could kind of see that, because the flashlight, the camera angle is weird on it. And at first I didn't like it, but now since it's actually kind of going for like a horror angle, it kind of makes you a little uncomfortable. So actually maybe I wouldn't change the camera angle of it. But like, just, if you're going to make me fight a whole bunch of guys, make the combat a little bit more responsive, if that makes sense. Also, fuck the birds or the ravens or whatever those things are. Oh my god, I hate those things so goddamn much.
They were fun the first couple times they come around, but yeah, when you fight waves and waves of them, it just becomes more frustrating than anything else.
Yeah, there's times where that they just don't makes sense in the narrative. I could see around like where they first inhabit. After that, like, come on, guys.
Do either of you know? So you mentioned before, Matt, how like some of the objects will become possessed and get thrown at you, which I also agree. It's kind of fun, but it does. There's moments though that they like, especially under the bridge, where they just throw so many at you. I'm like, oh my fucking god! Like the flashlight doesn't kill these things fast enough, and you're throwing like 4 at me at the same time. Like you really needed to like balance this out a little bit more. Um, but there's those random like black spots, like it's like almost
Mm-hmm.
like puddles of black goo. Do they hurt you if you walk into them? I always got rid of them, but like what's
So they
the
don't
point of
hurt.
them?
So they don't hurt you. They they distort a bit. I believe it's just an achievement hunt, if I remember correctly. Like there's no narrative reason. I think there are a couple times where you like need to get the gunk off something to proceed, but like for the most part, they're just these hidden like things. They're just like essentially darkness in physical form, but they don't really like talk about that manifestation that much. It just kind of is.
hmm Yeah, I think there's sometimes again, as Matt said, you have to get the gunk off at like a gate or something is stuck. The little puddles, I don't remember them hurting you, or if they do, it's so minimal, it's not really worth bothering with. It's just more of like almost like draws your attention unnecessarily. Like if you're just winding around a room and you wield, and all of a sudden your flashlight is honing in on something and trying to disperse it, and you're like, "Oh God, am I under attack?" No, it's just it's a puddle basically. That is, I don't, I agree. I don't think there's a narrative reason behind it. I think it's just like the darkness is taking over, or blah blah blah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something because I would keep taking them out. I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is going to end up being an achievement, but it was still just kind of. I'm like, if this is achievement, that's fine. But is there any other reason other than just achievement hunting? Because like they point them out. Like I don't know, it kind of reminds me of like what Uncharted does with like the trophies, where like you don't need them to beat the game, but they're nice little like extra bonus things for either achievement hunting or also added for world building. This feels like a kind of worse implementation of that, where it's less world building and it's just more just kind of like, okay, these things just randomly dot the screen. It's like, I'm not saying it's bad. I just think it's more of a net zero. Like it doesn't add anything to the game. It doesn't really take away anything from the game. It's just kind of there. I don't know why I'm dwelling on it so much. It just kind of confused me. I think that's why I'm like dwelling on it a bit. But okay. So any final thoughts on the gameplay from either of you, and then we'll get into we can talk about. I don't know. I'll leave it up to either. What do you guys? What do you two vote? Do you want to do overall aesthetic or and visuals and sounds and whatnot, or do you want to do story?
Um, I'll say probably let's maybe tackle the aesthetics first, just because we could really go on with the story.
That's fair. That's fair. All right. Well, any final thoughts on the gameplay, and then we'll move into the aesthetics.
No, I think I'm good. I think we've covered pretty much everything there is.
All right, let's move on to the overall aesthetics and visuals and music and whatnot. And in the when we were talking about all the thematic stuff in the beginning of, or the kind of the meta theme in the beginning of the episode, Matt, you had mentioned that you're a huge fan of the music. As I'm going to start off with you on this one. What about you? You don't have to focus on just the music and the sounds, but like what do you like or dislike about the aesthetics? Visuals, music, all that good stuff in this game.
I love all of it. I mean, I don't think there's a bad thing about any of it. I mean, the aesthetics are perfect. It feels like that kind of like, you know, Twin Peaksy kind of Twilight Zone kind of vibe. The music, the scoring, the couple of pop tracks they use, and of course all the old gods of Asgard stuff, like all that stuff rules. The rock concert, the music that's playing, like it all just it's awesome. I like that the game is broken up into episodes. It's meant to feel like a TV show, and
Mm-hmm.
the every episode. So I think it was meant to be episodic at first, like released episodically, and then it didn't. It ended up being released altogether. But like the the previously on every time, and then the title card, and then the wrap up, and then it starts like ends, has this like end screen, like end of chapter, and then you hear music, and then you move on to the next, and it does previously on every time. Like, it feels a little redundant on multiple replays, but I love the vibe of it. Again, it adds to that meta feel of like, this is meant to feel like a TV show about a thing, not real life, which adds to the insanity that I think Alan Wake is going through. And then, like, again, the score and the music is incredible. I think that the songs that are featured, so I always get these confused. So diegetic is in the world and non-diegetic is not in the world, right? Is that right?
Correct. So
Right.
something diegetic would be like if there was a theme to Alan Wake, if Alan Wake had a theme song, you would be walking around in the game world, and on the radio you would hear well, I guess it doesn't have to, that's more meta. But yes, diegetic would be like you're walking around, you hear music on a radio, and that's diegetic sound in the world.
Yeah, and so like the diegetic stuff of like the rock concert and the Old Gods of Asgard, I love, and then the non-diegetic stuff of like the scoring, and I mean, Petri Alanko does, I think I pronounced that correctly, does incredible compositions for this. Like, it's not something I want to listen to over and over again, but it sets the vibe really well. And then the stuff that I do listen to over and over again is the rock or pop tracks that are within the game or on the chapter ends as well. I don't really have a bad thing to say about this. I mean, the graphics, look aged, but what's really cool is that because a lot of the face models are based on actual actors, other members of the staff, famously the comic book scenes in Max Payne, it's a ton of like Sam Lake's family and folks who worked at the studio who posed for those scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And it just adds realism. And this is the same, like having Ilka be the face of Alan Wake while Matthew is the voice, like adds to this like level of realism. And then even in the remaster of the first game, like improving those character models, so it looks more in line with what Alan Wake will eventually do, which is even more realistic. I love that too. I don't mind games that have an aesthetic or like the characters don't look human. They have their own kind of vibe and style. But like
Mm-hmm.
when something goes for realism and really leans in and does a good job, I really love it because I just think it grounds a story like this so much more, which when then it gets bonkers, it's even better. The sound design is also incredible. Like every time like an object flies at you, or even more creepily, like the I forget what they call the enemies. There's a name for them.
The Taken.
The Taken. All of the whispers that the Taken have, like,
Mm-hmm.
it so good. And like that's, I think, the scariest thing about this game is when they're whispering, when you're walking through the woods and you're not sure where they are. Like all of that stuff, I think, is just done masterfully, and it's what makes this game the masterpiece I think it is. I'm willing to overlook some of the struggles I have with the combat because I get to engage in all of this other stuff that makes this world feel alive.
Mhm.
I think that's a really good point, Matt. Like I've had like the rest of this game is so well done that I'm in agreement with you. The rest of this game is so well done that the issues that I do have with its combat I can overlook. And I've had this debate without this could be a topic for a whole episode. Like, what's the most important aspect of a game? Like, I have a friend who's adamant that story is the most important, and I'm in disagreement because it's a game. The gameplay should be the most important, but I think with this, to bring it back to Alan Wake, like normally I'd be upset that they focused more on the story than the gameplay, but I think in this the gameplay is serviceable. I think is like disingenuous to say. I think it's better than serviceable. I think it's like if you're talking about like straight up good gameplay, it's not quite that high, but it's like I don't know, in between serviceable and good, I guess. So it's not bad enough that it takes away. It's just kind of more of a frustration. And I think where this game shines, I'm with you, is the overall aesthetic, just the amount, the world building. I can't get over the world building. Now I played the original version of this, and well, I'll go next, and then we'll throw it over to you, Phil. Well, I played the original version of this on my PC, and I actually beat it when my family and I went to a beach house, and I ended up downloading it on my gaming PC and finishing it on there. And let me tell you, it's very surreal plugging in my headphones while everyone else goes up to bed in a house I'm not 100% familiar with, and you hear all the sounds of the Taken like whispering in the dark woods, and it's like dark outside. And also, since like where the we were staying, it's kind of like it's a very walkable community, so people are walking around outside talking late into the hours of the night. So like I'm hearing people like voices in the game, and I can hear remnants of people outside. Oh my gosh, it creeped me the fuck out so bad going through this. um so like the sound, I add all that context from my own experience to say just how good the sound design is. It's really well executed. The visuals, I'm kind of with you, man. I didn't like necessarily like the character models or like the facial the graphics for the faces and stuff like that. But I actually think the overall like art direction is pretty solid, especially considering like there's a lot of fun like lighting choices they make, and how especially with the light paint that you see later on, or as you go through the game, and how light plays such an important part into the gameplay. So of course the way it's presented visually makes it a lot more interesting. I really like in general the overall presentation of this. And I actually had heard of Poets the Fall prior to this game, and I didn't really listen to them too much, and now I think I'm gonna have to go listen to them just to check out more of their music. But Phil, I want to throw it over to you. What are your thoughts on the overall aesthetics and visuals and whatnot?
I mean, I think it's gorgeous. I think the scenery itself, even if taken away from the action in peaceful conditions, this is a beautifully rendered world. This is both daylight and nighttime. It's exactly what I would expect of like a deep woods um, community like this. Honestly, the whole area is gorgeous. It's a great vacation spot if people weren't trying to murder you. Um, the the small town feeling of Bright Falls is, I think, is about as genuine as they can make it for a video game. I mean, the map is a little small because it's not really your focus, but it does enough of that central, like, here's the motel, here's the diner, here's the police station. You wouldn't notice if it didn't say police out front on the shingle. It's just down the road from Bob the auto mechanic, who's been working there for 30, 40 years. Everyone knows Bob. It's fully realized enough, and even the small town celebration, it reminds
Hmm.
me a lot of the small town celebrations where I grew up in PA, where it was all like church picnic coming in, and like everyone come have a beer with the priest, which is goddamn surreal if you've never been through that. Um, but Deer Fest that they have in the background of the game is very much that small town. We're just all getting together, folksy, having fun, you know Jerry, came in from the woods, had a few too many drinks, and he ran around with, streaking the town, and now everyone laughed about it for 20 years. But it's just small town. It's there. The aesthetics are great. The feel of it's great. The look of is great. The sound design, I think, did very, very well. Yes, graphics age. There are some timeless games, especially a lot of pixel art games that have been, because they're lower res or whatnot, have been able to retain their charm. Games of the Xbox 360 era, the PS3 era, were trying to be more realistic. It's very obvious the technical limitations on them now versus what we see when we boot up a game on PC or the Xbox Series X or PS5 or something like that. There's been a huge technological leap. I'm willing to overlook them. I mean, I remember when Alan Wake first came out, there was a lot of people got like really pissy about the look of Alan Wake's wife Alice, how they did that
Hmm.
one. Was nothing complimentary, and I thought to myself, like, God Almighty, if this was a real world woman who looked like this, this would be horrible for her, you know, because that nobody was nice about it. But again, graphics age. The music is very timely. It's very much tied to Wake, all of the pop tracks and stuff like that. Now, I'm difficult with music because I'm an old school metalhead. If they're not slamming on their instruments and screaming, probably not going to be my thing. But I do like what they did with especially with the rock scene, what Poets of the Fall did as the old gods of Asgard. Really kind of gave it that 1970s heavy metal feel, where it's like early days Black Sabbath,
Mm-hmm.
Motorhead, stuff like that. That a lot of the bands that come from the part of the world that Remedy Studios is home to in their various phases of like Viking metal and black metal and power metal and stuff like that, would have called back to and said, "Oh yes, we were listening to Black Sabbath when it was good, and and all this amazing stuff." And I think Poets of the Fall did that same thing. They really took that aesthetic on and made it their own for this game, and it really kind of helps add to the atmosphere and the environment, although they're only one part of it. The rest of it is definitely, like I said, it's good, it's workable. I don't know everyone there. Not always my thing, but I still think it's a very fair addition that makes the game more believable.
Agreed. I don't know what else to add to that. Honestly, I was just enraptured listening to you. uh, all right. Well, I think we can move on to the story for this now. I'm not going to go beat by beat through every single moment of this game, but I think we can do like obviously broad strokes of the story and that, but then really dive into like what we think of its themes, its plot twists, and all that good stuff. I guess I haven't started off a segment just yet, so I'll start off on this one. Um, I mean, the story the story is king in Remedy games. Story is really what this game focuses on, and I guess shouting out. I mentioned at the top of the episode but I'll say it again here. This is where the spoilers really come into play. Like we've touched on a few here and there, but this is going to be much more explicit in terms of what we spoil. So just a forewarning to everyone listening. But yeah, what I ended up liking about the story of this game. So just as a quick overall description of it, Alan Wake is a writer going through writer's block. His wife, Alice, right? Alice, I got to make sure I have
Yeah,
this right here. His wife, Alice, and him travel to the small town of Bright Falls. It does take place in Washington State. Um, and he is trying to go there to help get rid of a 2-year stretch of writer's block. And he thinks he's going there to decompress and relax, but Alice actually wanted to take him up there because there is a psychiatrist or some type of person, like some type of therapist who quote unquote works specifically with creative people, which is as shady as that sounds. And
he's a
you find,
leech.
oh yeah, oh yeah. And he goes to get like the basically where they're the keys to where they're going to stay, and they can't find the person initially that was going to give them the keys to it. But he does meet this woman who says, "Oh well, yeah, I'm the one that you rented the property from or the house from. Here's the keys to it. You can go out to Cauldron Lake," or gives them directions to it. And they go out to this cabin on an island in the middle of a lake called Cauldron Lake, and this is where Alice reveals to him that she has brought him here so she can, or he, oh my gosh, he can see Emil Hartman and hopefully get over his writer's block. And she has good intentions, but he is pissed off beyond all belief. And it alludes to it in the beginning of the game, and as the game goes on, you find out their marriage is, I'm not saying on the rocks entirely, but he hasn't been the nicest to her, to say the least. And so he leaves to get a breath of fresh air. Then all of a sudden he hears a scream, and he goes in and he sees her fall off the balcony of the house that's on the island, and she goes into the water, and he jumps in after her. And the next thing he realizes, he wakes up in a car crash, in his car, crashed off the side of the road, and he doesn't remember how he got there. The last thing he remembers is jumping into the water after Alice. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff. He basically has to figure out like what happened to his wife, what's going on. And there's also a page of a manuscript that is written by him, and he knows it is because the title of the manuscript is Departure, which was going to be the title of the book he was trying to work on before writer's block kicked in. And he sees that what is written on the page starts happening in real life, and he's understandably so very confused as to how this is happening, like what kind of witchcraft is going on here that this is happening. And that's the basic setup for the story. And you go through the whole game and you're trying to find out what happened to Alice. There's one person who claims that they have kidnapped Alice, and when you finally are able to confront him, turns out he was just lying, and he ends up getting killed by something. You don't know what. It's this mysterious force. From what I remember, am I correct with this so far? I beat this 2 months ago, so I'm doing a lot of this from memory.
Yeah, you're on target.
All right, stay on target. You're still trying to figure out like who like where Alice is. The first guy clearly was lying, but while all this is happening, these weird shadow people are attacking you, which is what we mentioned before. They are called the Taken. They're possessed. It's the townsfolk of Bright Falls possessed by a dark force, and you don't really know what it is, but you know that there is like something happens and everything like they only come out at night. You know they are afraid of light and things of that nature. And I after he does try to confront the dude who took Alice, who claims he took Alice, I try to remember he ends up having a psychotic break, and he awakens in the office of Emil Hartman, and that's when you kind of find out that Hartman's nothing but a fraud, and he exclusively works on creative people so he can steal the work while giving them medicine to kind of keep them in there, so like they don't need the medicine, and it kind of keeps them in this clinic so that way he can just take advantage of their work. I've been talking enough, though. I know we haven't finished the rest of the story, but I've been talking enough. Would either of you like to take over the rest of the story before we move on?
I can cover from a little bit from there.
Go for it, Phil. Go for it.
All right. Yeah, Hartman is supposedly he tries to sell himself off as a therapist that works with artists who are having difficulty with their creativity and their art. And he kind of looks at Alan Wake as his big fish, his big catch here.
Mm-hmm.
Jokingly enough, I think this is a little bit of Remedy kind of like poking fun at themselves. One of the patients in his facility, Hartman even says, well, he only works on video games. There's some artistic merits, so the therapies kind of work. So, kind of poking fun at the video game industry a little bit, and probably themselves as being authors trying to make games for a living. But once he gets out of the clinic, due to events that go on, this is where we also get to meet more of the two probably most underrated characters in the game, Thor and Odin, the Anderson brothers, who are the old gods of Asgard. And they're in the clinic too, and they're basically telling Wake that, look, we know this is all bullshit. This is absolute insanity. You have to be insane. It's the only way to survive. And these two old guys, these two old burned out rock and roll guys, create enough commotion with the oncoming storm. And like I said, they really do believe that they are embodiments of the Norse pantheon, Odin and Thor specifically, that cause enough trouble that give Alan the chance to get out. But then he spends, like I said, the rest of the game trying to get back to the remainder of the pages. The thing that really ties it most, I think, to Twin Peaks, especially because it's very obvious, as we said, Twin Peaks is the big deal behind here, is that there's an FBI agent named Nightingale who is, I think he really wants to make Wake a big caller to improve his career. So he keeps, of course, calling Alan Wake by every other famous author's name. He calls him Lovecraft. He calls him King. He calls him Ellis at some point. He's basically trying to be smarter than he actually is. The real intelligent law office here is the actual Sheriff Breaker. And I forget her first name off the top of my head. She actually does finally begin to believe Alan that something terrible has been going on, despite Alan and Barry both trying to convince her something has gone down here. And she actually is able to get them out to the town's, like, essentially crazy cat lady that wanders around, that constantly has light around here, Christmas lights, a candle, flashlight, very allegoric to the log lady from Twin Peaks. And she has had a special room at the local power plant set aside for an item that was given to her by Thomas Zane, the author who had the Cauldron Lake cabin before Alan Wake and his wife. had it in the 70s and had strangely gone through something of the same mirror process as Alan did, where his wife went missing. Their marriage was on the rocks. This local woman, much like Rose, the diner lady, is in love with Alan. The lamp lady was enamored with Thomas Zane. Zane has been trying to contact Alan through a lot of dream sequences. He's often shown as to be like either like this old-timey diving suit. He's been trying to like help Alan like in dream sequences get to where he needs to be. And eventually it all comes down to an item called the clicker, which was an item Alan had as a child. His mother gave to him, and apparently Thomas Zane wrote this into a story long before Alan was born about Alan's childhood and this clicker. And the clicker is, as Alan said, is imbued with childhood magic and is going to be the thing that's going to hopefully free Alice at the end. I will let you guys take over at this point if anyone would like to wrap up.
Sure. So basically, at this point, Alan has the weapon he needs to defeat. I can't remember the name of Thomas Zane's lover because she is the embodiment of the darkness.
Yes.
She has a name, but I'm blanking on what it is. But in order to defeat her, because essentially what she wants is she had trapped Thomas Zane in the dark place because she wanted to keep his writing for herself. His writing fueled her and this dark presence, and now she hungers for more, and so she wants to trap Alan in that space too, and it's why she took Alice. She's holding on to Alice, and Alan wants to try and save Alice, even if it means sacrificing himself. And the only way to do it, seemingly, is with the clicker. And so Alan fights his way back to the cabin, and once there, goes after the dark presence and confronts her so he can free Alice. And the story basically ends with him using the clicker to, in theory, destroy the dark presence and free Alice from the lake. And one of the last scenes we see is Alice surfacing and hearing reports of the death of how Alan Wake died at Cauldron Lake, and no one's seen him since. I think the final scene is Alan in the dark place trying to write his way out.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about this story, I know I said that we wouldn't go beat by beat, but I almost feel like after kind of going through this, you kind of have to discuss a lot of the themes of this game. Like there's a lot of different elements that they go into, and specifically the big plot twist that you find out in that the week of time where Alan dives in after Alice and then wakes up in his car crash. That is like the key moment. Now, essentially, like you were both saying, how the darkness was holding Alan there in like this kind of like almost otherworldly place, just the dark world, I guess. And he is being possessed by the dark spirit, which I looked up. It's Jagger is the woman's name.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Was Thomas Zane's wife, because Thomas Zane back in the 70s, he tried to use the supernatural power of the lake to bring back his wife who had passed away. But since there was a dark presence in the lake that was kind of like doing a lot of this stuff, it tried to use him as a way to break out from there and be able to essentially I don't know if it's take over the world or just kind of break out and be free from its constraints of that world, of the dark world, and come into our world. And Zane is able to realize this, and he is able to write something in a way to defeat it, because he essentially takes the new version of his wife, which isn't really his wife, and I believe they even say like he rips out her heart, right? Like it's pretty gruesome in order to stop her, in order to stop the darkness. And so you fast forward to now when Alan Wake's here. Alan Wake is now trapped in there, and he's trying to write his way out of this, and he's possessed. But they talk about it when the big plot twist happens, how he thinks that he was subconsciously realizing what the darkness was doing to him, and so he created a way he wrote a way into the story that he would wake up, like something would be able to wake him up. And so he wrote Thomas Zane into his story, and Thomas Zane in his diver bell suit is the one that saves him and is able to fight the darkness for a little bit, and enough for Wake to get away and then get into his car. But because of this, he had to write himself into the story and do it in a way that he could make the events of his own story progress, while making it so that way the darkness would think it's getting what it wants, but and by the time that it would, like, it's this weird, it's, once again, it's very meta. It's playing with the idea of he's Alan Wake is writing his own story, but that's happening to him at the same time he's writing it, without realizing that he is the one writing his own story. And when you get to the spot at the end where, they have the clicker where Thomas Zane wrote the clicker into Alan Wake's existence, there is an element of like, well, did Thomas Zane actually do that, or did Alan Wake write Thomas Zane writing that into existence? You know what I mean? Like, there's so many layers you could go down into this. Like, did Thomas Zane create Alan Wake in his story, all for the effect to eventually totally defeat this darkness, or did or these two separate instances, and Alan is just using the power in a different way to kind of almost like change the past, almost in a slight way? I don't know. I do either of you have opinions on this? But Matt, I'll start with you. Do either of you have opinions on this weird meta plot twist that they kind of go with?
I mean, I love it. The problem here, and I think Phil will agree with me, is that Phil and I have played Control and we've played Alan Wake 2. Those games fill in some of the gaps here.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I can definitively tell you what's happening here, but I don't want to, because I do have faith that you'll eventually play Alan Wake 2, and I'm definitely going to harass you until you play Control, because that's not that scary and you absolutely need to play
No,
it.
that looks more like an action game.
It very much is, but like, that's the thing, is that this, all I can say definitively, because we know based on the meta text, is this was really happening. Cauldron Lake, for some reason, holds this power that when writers are in this place, they can make things real, and that it's unclear whether it's just something that Thomas Zane could do and then Alan can also do, or if it's the dark place fueling it, or like, at this point it's unclear. But the dark place and the Taken and the dark presence are all this special force that essentially allows Alan to write things into reality, and Alan, realizing that, is able to manipulate it. And so he writes the end of the story that he wants after letting the dark presence think that they're winning, so he can save Alice, because all he cares about is saving Alice and throwing himself into the dark place to essentially a trade, right? Sacrificing himself so Alice can survive. And that's why we see Alice surface and swim away and have no idea what happened to Alan at this moment. There are 2 DLCs that play with this a bit, and then American Nightmare, which is essentially like a short form standalone game that all fill in these gaps also. And then Control has its own Alan Wake specific DLC that also fills in some of these holes before Alan Wake 2. And so, I mean, as far as how I feel about it, I love it. It's why I love this game. I'm an X-Files fan. I like weird storytelling. I'm a Doctor Who fan. Like, I like when things are weird and abnormal and don't have quick explanations. So, like, I bought into this hook, line, and sinker. And again, I bought into this because, without spoiling anything about Control basically does the same thing that Alan Wake does. It throws you into the deep end, doesn't really explain a lot in the beginning, and you like unravel it with the character. And I love that kind of storytelling, where you know as much as the main character does, and as they learn about this world and the rules, you also learn about it. They use this trope over and over and over again in their games, Remedy, at least the ones I've played, and I think it works really well. I think it's why I identify with their stuff, because they really put you in the shoes of the main character. Even if your ideals don't align with them, you are in their shoes because you know as much as they do. And I think it's done truly masterfully, and it's why I love this game so much.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And the thing is, I think in the years since Alan Wake came out, Control ended up, especially Control's Alan Wake DLC, but the base game for Control kind of alludes to the events that happen at Cauldron Lake around Bright Falls, and definitely Alan Wake 2 plugs in a lot of those remaining holes. But if you're just solidly playing Alan Wake, the question becomes, okay, that missing week, it's very obvious that he was in a dark place, in the dark place writing. Did he get ejected back into the real world to play this out? Is he actually in a mirror world? Is he in some kind of catastrophic reflection of the town of Bright Falls and Cauldron Lake and everything around that? That is the dark presence's background, which is why he can't just hop in a car and say, I'm out, I'm driving to Detroit, and just, leave the city. Other than his main drive is to save his wife. And we're not going to be coy about this. Alan Wake is not a nice guy.
No.
He is not
No.
he's
Kind
not a
of an
paladin.
asshole.
He's not a shining hero. No, he is a total piece of shit for a while. And he really kind of has to come to the idea over the course of the game that I have allowed my success to get to my head. I've treated my friends badly. I've treated my wife terribly. And if I have to sacrifice myself to get her back, I will absolutely do it. And as Matt said, it's weird storytelling, it's weird building. I love stories in the weird as well. There's a whole genre called weird fiction for a reason. I love that stuff. It doesn't have to make sense. You kind of, like I said, know about as much as the character does. You'll come along the way. I don't need someone standing over me like the author being a third party exposition dump going, and this is what to expect next, and this is where we're going, and this is why you'll love it because aren't I so great? Look at my brains. Ha 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 ha. And after a while, you're like, dude, just let me read the damn story. Let me experience it. And Remedy is very good at that. Now, I will say, and a little bit of a controversial take here. I have mixed feelings very, very badly about Control. I love the Alan Wake DLC. I love the character of Jesse Faden. I like the way they did everything. It's just something about Control does not totally click with me. I don't know why. This may just be me. But I don't say it's a bad game. Actually, it's very good. But it does, I think, a little go a little too much into the over-explainy side of things. Like when you have a government agency that sits around and goes, and we have studied the science, and even if the science is weird, I kind of begin to lose plots a little bit when somebody says, and here's the definitive reason why XYZ works. Even if we're not 100% sure, we've been able to manipulate it. But they don't do that much with Alan Wake. The mystery is still there. What was the precipitating event? What causes this? Why does this force exist? Is, I think, sometimes better left the mystery. It's just that Alan is trying to get through it. He's trying to work it. And again, that's also the question. The Thomas Zane character. Was it just a pile of books by an author he's never heard of that suddenly is trying to contact him? Is it something he made up to give him a sort of surrogate into this world, to give himself enough
Mm.
divorcing from
Mhm.
the plot that he can now enact his will on it? Is there actually a Thomas Zane that's like, wow, I'm stuck, I'm a ghost, I don't want Alan to go through the same thing, I'm going to insert myself and say, Wake, you've never heard of me, you don't know me, I'm from an earlier time, but I've been through it, let me help you get through this, brother.
I I think what I like too about this, and you both mentioned how specifically, I think you just mentioned, Phil, with how Wake, you did just mention, I'm sorry, you specifically mentioned, Phil, how Alan is not a good person and he kind of learns to be a better person as the game goes on. I know that's not the most recent thing you said, but I want to jump back to it quick because something I've thought about this before, something that I remember seeing a trend online. Maybe I haven't seen it recently, in which I'm happy, but like I remember seeing a trend online that people were always like, if you said you liked some media or some game, people are like, oh well, that character is problematic. I'm like, well, that's kind of the point. Like if like you sometimes you need to have a character who's like flawed. It doesn't have to necessarily yeah, it doesn't have to necessarily be like straight up problematic, but like if the character's in flawed, like what are you doing with the narrative? Like that's the whole
Hmm.
point. You're here to experience something and learn from that character's mistakes and follies, or be inspired by them, or feel some sort of emotion. Like you don't have to like them, and or you can feel conflicted about it. Like you're excited, you want to help Alan Wake in this game, but then the more you get to know him, the more you're like, well, he's not really a good dude. But then you also understand he has a very, like, he wants to save his wife. That's a very noble mission of his. So you want to still help him, but you also realize he's flawed and not good,
Mhm.
or not a good person necessarily. And it just got me thinking about that, because I remember like a couple years ago that was a real thing, real like sticking point with a lot of people online. Well, this person's not this person's super flawed, they're not a good person, why would you like this character so much? I'm like, well, that's kind of the point. It doesn't mean you aspire to be the character, but
Mhm.
you find something interesting about them, or either you realize something about yourself that you can then use to learn. You realize something about yourself through the character that you can then learn to better yourself. Like, I don't know. And I think what's interesting about Alan Wake, and I think one of the things I like about his character is that the whole game is very introspective. Like, he's introspective throughout the whole
Mhm.
game. He's trying to really figure out his own motivations, and he really realizes like what a shitty person he was to his wife for uh as long as he was. Now, I mean, I'd have to ask my wife. I don't think I've been a shitty husband, but it's still something where it's like that makes me think like, well, has there been any moments in my life where maybe, my wife just asked an innocuous question and I was cranky, so I was short with her or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, that's a minor thing, but like, I think if like, to me, it just, this game kind of made me a little bit more introspective about like how I treat other people without even realizing it sometimes. And not every game is going to make you do that. Obviously, games make you feel different emotions, but I really like that about Alan Wake, the character, is that there's actually a character arc. Like, he goes through this transformation, and when he decides to rescue Alice and move on, they talk about it with Thomas Zane things. Like, the reason why Thomas Zane's attempt to bring his wife back is he didn't offer anything in return. And so what came back was this evil shell of that wasn't even his wife, just this hollow evil darkness that was just in the shape of it, in the form of his deceased wife. And Alan learns this, whether it's because Zane wrote it or Alan wrote it, who knows? I will find out when I play Alan Wake 2, maybe. He realizes there has to be something given in order to save her, because she's now been taken. And so he sacrifices himself. And so when I finished it, I was bummed by that, but I understood the character growth. The whole reason for that, it was character growth, and he realized that this is almost to atone for his mistakes. He's like, well, I can save her even if I have to be in here, and maybe I'll write my way out, which I'm very excited to see if it does. I don't know. I like this character a lot. I like how this game shows Alan's growth throughout the narrative. But any final thoughts on the story before we wrap up this episode, y'all? Like, what any things you want to say before we close it out?
I mean, I could go on and actually like kind of explain like why I felt that Alan Wake as a character in this game like really stuck with me above a lot of other things. Um, but I think we kind of wrapped the story pretty well as it was.
Matt, do you have any final thoughts before we move on?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think we covered just about everything. I think ultimately this game is a great introduction to a larger world. And while I don't necessarily agree with Phil's assessment about the world building of Control, I can understand it. I mean, Phil is absolutely right in the fact that Alan Wake kind of nudges at it and winks at it, and Control goes, here's what's actually happening. And so if you don't like their explanation, you could bump up against it. But I do love this game as this introduction to this world of weird and wild stuff happening. And that kind of lets your imagination run wild with like, well, what is really happening here? And like,
Hmm.
and I can't agree more about your, like, sometimes characters have to be flawed. Often I feel like
Hmm.
characters always need to be flawed. It's like the difference for me is like the comics and the movie Scott Pilgrim. When someone says, I love Scott Pilgrim, the property, I go, yeah, me too. When someone goes, I love Scott Pilgrim, the person, I go, that's a red flag, because Scott Pilgrim is a terrible person.
Hmm.
But that's the same thing with Alan Wake. It's one thing to say I love Alan Wake, I love this kind of character, but like if you say I love Alan Wake. I want to be just like him. It's like, okay, you can go the other way. You can
Mhm.
get away from me. So yeah, but I do genuinely love this game, and I'm glad that we got to dive so deep into it because, see what I did there? Dive deep.
Ah,
There you go.
Also,
right
like
into Cauldron Lake.
the game has one of the best final lines, and I don't know how Phil feels, but I feel like the second game also has a really great final line in a similar
It
fashion.
does. I do
But
have to agree it does.
like the realization of like this isn't a lake, it's an ocean, that like he's
Mhm.
just sinking deeper, is just really great. It's really poetic. I really love how it ends on that note.
Yeah. We come to these stories for the drama. We
Yeah.
do. That's the point of the media. We come to and we don't follow characters because they're a shining paragon of humanity, but we also don't follow characters who are at the nadir, the absolute depth, the terrible bottom rung characters. We may be fascinated by them, but we don't follow them. When we come to stories like this, we've come to a flawed person that we can see, at least in some capacity, if not ourselves, someone we may know going through the motions, hopefully having a character arc. I mean, even in some of the great pieces of fiction from the Middle Ages, the ancient world, there is some level of character arc to the main story, even if it's like, say, John Milton's Paradise Lost, where even Satan sort of gets like a sort of a character arc, not someone you would think of as a terrible villain rewritten into that. Um, and Alan Wake is a good character of that. You can love the property. Alan himself is not someone you want to emulate. He's really kind of a dick, and you want to avoid that or realize that, ooh, have I been acting like this in my life? Maybe I need to like calm down, step back and take a look, take a breather, maybe get a therapy session going.
I very true, and I think the only reason I even brought that up, it honestly popped into my head where I just remember a few years ago where someone would say, like you were saying before, man, I'm a fan of Scott Pilgrim, not like the character, but like the brand. I love the movie or the graphic novels or whatnot, and someone I would see a response online like, why Scott's a bad person. I'm like, well, I'm not saying I aspire to be Scott. Like maybe there's specific parts of a character, not Scott in particular. I don't know the brand, the specific IP of Scott Pilgrim all the well. I've seen the movie and that's about it. But like, like for Alan Wake, for example, the thing I like about Alan Wake, he's a good writer. I wish I was a writer. I wish I could write. Do I wish I was as angry and as abusive as he was? Abso-fucking-lutely not. Like there's things that you can admire about characters but also not want to be them. And I always thought it was weird that for a little while, like a couple of years ago, someone would say, well, I really like this. I'm like, why? That character's super problematic and has all these flaws. I'm like, yeah, that's the point. I'm not saying I want to be that character, but that's the point. Like you learn through their flaws. You learn because they're making a mistake. You don't have to. That's kind of the point. But and anyway, I could go off on that. That was it kind of popped in my head, but it fit in really nicely with our discussion. So thank you both for joining me for this. Um, the last thing I want to ask you, Phil. Did you get to talk about the reason why this game meant so much to you? I want to kind of end with that.
Okay. Now, like I said, I went into this one. It's a dual approach. Why this game really stuck with me among a lot of others. And I do have to go off on a little bit of a concept here. So if you lovely gentlemen would be willing to follow me for a little bit, I will try not to bore you too badly. I think, and this is just a theory I have, what we see in gaming these days, especially with so many games that are story driven and have really sort of upped the concept of story from the early days of just jumping on mushrooms and turtles or collecting rings or something like this. My theory is for a long time that a lot of writers of games have been chasing the concept of, well, essentially the ghost of Roger Ebert at this point, the great or maybe not so great film critic that we've
Mm-hmm.
all heard of. I remember one time Roger Ebert did scathingly give his opinion on video games is that they can never be art. They will never be anything more than shallow sort of ephemeral pieces of disposable media. And I think a lot of writers, especially in games, sort of took that one right on the chin and went, maybe we should be up in the game. Maybe we should be making something more out of this. And, again, this is kind of questionable because Ebert himself was known as a guy who, and I'm going to get a little blunt here, he was involved in like writing movies like Beyond the Valley of the Dolls and whatnot. There was a famous exploitation director whose name I cannot remember, but he was like the director behind like Faster Pussycat, Kill Kill, and stuff like that, who worked with Ebert in his early days, and very famously in an interview with The Onion said, "Yeah, I knew Ebert. He loved writing about big tits. This guy ain't as high and mighty as he thinks." I have to look up the guy's name; it's going to bother me. But actually, if you can find it, it's one of the interviews in the Onion's AV Club book called "Tenacity of the Cockroach," in which they interviewed a lot of people in media, famous personalities, music, movies, TV, stuff like that, from the angry all the way through the very happy with what they did. So Roger Ebert is not exactly the guy, of course, as we all are. We are flawed, but I think a lot of game developers kind of took Ebert's editorial on the chin and said, we got to up our game. And we have begun to see narrative become, and I think to the benefit of games, narrative has become more of a much bigger part of gaming. It's really kind of cemented a lot of our favorite franchises for a very good reason. I mean, there was only a point, I think, in gaming that was going to develop and be like platformers or first-person shooters or something like that, where eventually people who are going to age out of gaming unless something stuck around, and that was going to be whoever was there to tell a story and tell an interactive story. Now, for Wake, and like I said, I in my own review of this, I'll give you guys sort of the overview here. Alan Wake came to me at a time when I've always identified myself as a creative person. I have been very I've been very open with people about this subject, where the only reason I'm still alive and here on this earth is because I had a high school art teacher, high school English teacher, and the high school student counselor who said, you can make art a career. Because I was going nowhere in my life. I had a terrible number of years, and my prospects for success beyond high school they didn't exist. And I had already made a plan to kill myself, to commit suicide. I've been very open about that. If this upsets you guys, I do apologize. If it upsets any listeners, I apologize, but it is part of who I am. It's part of my story. And as the college years went on and I went into, working world, adulthood, that anchor for me was that I could be a creative person. And maybe if I had made something somewhere that people liked, I could finally feel content. I could finally feel that I had really contributed, that I wasn't just a worthless loser. I'm not smart. I realize that. I'm not athletic. I don't have a lot to offer. I don't have a winning personality. But if I could make a thing that had lasting value, it would kind of make up for all of that. Playing Alan Wake as a game was at the time when, this is just before my wife and I got married, when things were really bad financially. We were sniping at each other a lot. Things were rough. And I was playing this and I went, here's a guy who had everything. He got that success that maybe I couldn't get. Maybe I'm not good enough as a creative person. I mean, I've had more than enough doors slammed in my face with people from, for comic book companies and artists and book publishers and whatnot who've gone, thank you, but no thank you. Have you considered maybe not quitting your day job? And yeah, that's true. Most of us don't get to live out the people who we want to be. Someone's got to file the paperwork. Someone's got to fix the toilets. Someone's got to, make sure that, the trains run on time and everything. If we were all rock stars and artists and there'd be no electricity. No one would be, there'd be no food. There'd be no gardens. Things would be falling apart. I get that. Most people don't get to live out their dreams. I was hoping, though, that I could be that 1 in a million, that 1 in a million chance. Like, despite the fact that I had been told, like, by many people by that point, listen, you suck. Really quit. Just, honest to God, please quit what you're doing. You're just embarrassing yourself at this point. You're not a good artist. You're not a good writer. Stop. And I had seen Alan Wake, and I realized that, wow, here's the guy that had all this goddamn success. He did it. And he is an asshole to everybody. He's struggling with writer's block. I wish I had the ability to struggle with writer's block. I don't have that. I can come up with a million great things. And then my brain immediately goes, and you're terrible at all of them. Why are you even bothering, dude? And I saw a part of myself in Alan because I also knew I wasn't being very good to my then girlfriend, soon to be wife at this time. And I'm like, I don't want to ruin this relationship. I need to do something, because if this guy's got multi-million dollars, he's on television shows promoting his shit and whatnot. I don't have that excuse. I need to basically apologize and say, I'm terribly sorry. I realize that living with me is tough. My wife will proudly tell you she's not a creative person. She is a logical thinker. She's very rational, very left-brained, and I'm the right-brained person here. And I realize that she doesn't understand what I do for creativity, what it goes through, but she's willing to allow me the ability to do it, even if it doesn't make any money. Believe me, I wish I did. There was a lot I'd give up if I could, actually make this work, but it doesn't happen. And just, it kind of stuck with me because I saw a guy really going through hell who wasn't a very good person, who had all the opportunities, he squandered them. And then he's now trying to use this ability he has, this talent, to essentially write himself out of hell. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe that's the key. Maybe that's it. Maybe you have to just accept that there's going to be failure. There's going to be a lot of failure. You're not always going to succeed. Or what does success look like? Does success look like you accomplished the thing you wanted to do? Does it mean you have a small audience and you just still have to have a day job, but you get to do what you get to do? Again, success in the creative arts and the artistic field does involve a lot of luck. There's no way around that. It really does involve knowing the right people, being in the right place in the right time. I can't fault anybody for that. There's a lot of really talented people. There's also a lot of really shitty people who do creative work, and somehow they were in the right place at the right time. And you sit there and you really read a book. How many times have you guys read a book or read an article or played a game and gone, how the hell did this get made? Who let this happen? How did, I would have taken that $10 million and created a masterpiece, and we would have been fantastic. But that's just not how the world works. We know that. We absolutely know that. And that was kind of my wake-up call, again, pun not intended here, but to maybe just say, okay, maybe I got to put my pencil and my pen down and just focus on reality. And it took me a long time to come back around to the idea that creative person is still inside me. He just needed time, I think, additional time on to rethink things, to come back, to be mature about it, and to say, okay, what actually does success mean? Truly, deeply, what does success mean? Does it mean I just get to do what I can? Do I make small amounts of money here and there? Maybe that's it. My name will never be on a marquee. I will never be getting signings at a Barnes & Noble. I realize this. But playing Alan Wake kind of made me realize that, okay, first of all, I got to get my own head straight. Second, I can call myself whatever I want. I can call myself a pot roast if I like. And that's just, it is, but that doesn't make it true. The same with being creative. I can call myself a creative person. Is anyone going to see value in that? I don't know. Am I going to see value in it? Yes. We'll work from there. And I have a weird side story that I've told with this one. This is the part where people actually said, I didn't expect to cry at the end of a review of Alan Wake. while I was playing this, we had adopted the senior cat. And he wasn't in good health. He eventually died of lung cancer. But during my play of this game, I would often play at night after my wife had gone to bed, and he was my companion. He would sit by me. And a couple days before he died, I had a dream. I was in Bright Falls. In my head, I was in Bright Falls. I was running through the woods. I was getting chased by the Taken. I had no flashlight. I had no gun. I didn't know what to do. I was just running. Now, up to this point in my life, nightmares have been pretty frequent for me. A lot of nightmares. I've been diagnosed with PTSD over the years, and nightmares are a frequent thing that happens when you have PTSD because it's your brain trying to calculate with your stress and anxiety hormones that have been driven far beyond their capacity of any human being should have to be a part of. And somehow this transmogrified itself into I'm in Bright Falls, I'm running through the darkness, and I see a light in the distance. I'm like, my brain had awoken enough to go, I've been playing Alan Wake. It's like, what the hell is going on here? Of course, I'm dreaming about a video game. And it turned out it was this cat. He was the light source. And he would do that thing where animals like stop and look back at you, like kind of like human, follow me. So I was chasing after him while I'm being chased. And he disappeared into a light wall. And just before I hit the wall of light, I woke up in the real world. I woke up, my wife was next to me asleep, and this cat and the other cats we had at the time were asleep at our feet. I woke up enough, the cat in question picked up his head, looked at me, nodded as if knowing, and went back to sleep. 2 days later, he died.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
So it was a weird story, and that kind of cemented me, and I went, holy shit, in retrospect, this is not a normal game. I don't have gaming experiences like this. I've played many over the years. I don't normally dream of, I've played Resident Evil. I don't dream of zombies, not getting chased by them. I've played, Castlevania. That's not a thing to me. Like I said, any game you may have been a part of. I know people have like played games and dreamt about them, but that was such a surreal experience to me on top of it at a time when I was feeling like really at my lowest about my abilities that just the concept of Alan Wake as it played out just made perfect sense to me. Now, I know that's a long story to get all there, but that's kind of what this game has meant to me over the years and why I will defend it, despite, my issues with the combat or the gameplay, is it's really a meta narrative of a man who is creative and who is struggling and doesn't have a clear path and has to do what he can to try and make that clear path for himself.
Wow. I feel weird saying that's beautiful because of how some of the dark stuff that you did talk about. And thank you for sharing that. Sincerely, man. Like I was not expecting that. And I don't mean that in like holy shit, why did you tell us all that? I mean that sincerely as in a, like, that makes me appreciate this game more in a sense. Because especially like we all do podcasts on video games, and we love this medium for various reasons, and we talk about art in these nebulous terms sometimes to make ourselves not necessarily sound smart, but like to like really try to get to the bottom of like what a game makes us feel. But that is what art is. What you just talked about is the important, like, shows the importance of art and what it can mean to humanity, because I was actually talking something similar like this to some people at work today, where like you hear cliches all the time, and it's not until you experience something or a cliche actually, or you experience something or it's described in a different way, where that cliche suddenly resonates with you. And the same goes for art. Like, to me, like, this was just a really fun game that I got to think about this character and how his growth, but like this was something that like you saw yourself in Alan Wake, almost like the self you kind of wished you could, like, at that time you wished you could have been. And saw this motherfucker still isn't happy, even though he has all of this at the world, and it really caused you to reflect and think. And that's what art is. That's what art does. That's what it's supposed to. Like when art hits you, and it doesn't. Not every bit of art is going to hit you. It's it's going to inform you in different ways, shapes, and forms. But like not every art is going to hit you on such an emotional level. But when it does, that it I don't know if this came at the time when you were saying before you were suicidal, but would you say this game saved your life, or did this kind of happen after that?
This kind of happened after, but
Okay.
it's at times like this that it gives me a chance to, like I said, as you said, reflect. Art is power. Art is a power that, and this is what I try to impart to my students when I go into the classroom every day, is that you don't have to be the best at this, but this is a power. This is an ability you have to express who you are, to say and to make and to do and to be. I said to my kids every day, I say, look, I know most of you are not going to follow the path of the artist as a career. This is a tough gig. You're all going to go on to be doctors and lawyers and truck drivers and machinists and just about every other goddamn thing. But don't pass this up. There's a lot you can learn from this. And like I said, they're middle schoolers. They're like,
Mm,
why am I in here? I don't want to do this. Can I go to PE? They're like, okay, I get it. It's not glamorous. I mean, what you see online is your favorite rappers, your favorite pop stars, your favorite comic book artists, that YouTube author or YouTube the artist that you like that draws Dragon Ball and Demon Slayer and all this stuff, and you want to emulate that. But you don't learn that you can create this. You don't have to just imitate. You can make, you can do, you can be your own thing. And in that, you can be the person that you want to be. Express yourself how you are. And sometimes it lands, sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the student. But that's what I try to do, and that's what I try to teach myself. And even when I do my own podcasts, I'm not trying to come off sounding like I'm hoity-toity or this great intellectual. I'm just trying to express from the concept of a creative person viewing this medium as not only a fan, but as something that I understand on a certain level. Maybe not all the ins and outs of game development, what goes through it, and meetings and concept art and prep and story writing and whatnot, but I can understand. And
mhm,
this medium that we love, that we play games in, there is a power there. There is a power that I think gets passed off too much as this is trash. This is just for kids. You know, my son played Grand Theft Auto and he gave me lips, so I took away the controller. No, there's a lot more that goes on here with games. And yes, do I over intellectualize it? Maybe I do. Maybe there's a lot of people that are like, no, I just want to get in a group, online and shoot some motherfuckers. That's how I relax. That's valid too. I get it. But if you just look a little deeper than the surface, you're going to find there's a lot of power here in this medium. And it's something we can do for good.
mhm. That I don't know how else to cap off the episode other than that.
I got nothing.
I,
I can't follow that up. And I've been speaking into a microphone for like 12 years. I got nothing here. That was great. Thank you, Phil, for
that
sharing
was
all that.
Oh,
Incredible.
you're
yes.
welcome. Thank you.
That was beautiful. And like I said, it that's what art is. And that's, I mean, wasn't expecting that on an Alan Wake episode, and I'm so happy that, not that you had to go through all that, but that this game meant that much to you that you were able to take that out of it. Like it's God damn, I love video games. Well, all right. I don't know how else to end this other than a hairpin turn. So, that will do it for this episode. I think. I don't think we can end it any better than that. So before we go, we should hear the wonderful shout outs of these two amazing guests for this episode. I can't thank you both enough for giving me your time and your wisdom and your thoughts on this. And this was a wonderful conversation. Thank you both. We'll start off with you, Matt. Where can the good people find you online, and what would you like to promote?
Sure. Thank you for having me. Always an honor to bully my way. I mean, be asked to be a part of a wonderful podcast. Uh, you can find me on social media at DJ_Stormageddon on all platforms except Blue Sky, where there is no underscore. It's just DJ Stormageddon. You can find all of my work at DJStormageddon.com. Right now, I am the host of 2 podcasts I'm currently working on. One is Fun and Games that I do with the incredible Jeff Moonen, previous guest of this show, on the Animal episode. And we do a broad topic-based conversation pod about different aspects of the gaming industry, whether it's retrospectives on consoles or certain genres of games or certain franchises. We talk about signposting in games or what the word Metroidvania really means, or we interview game devs, composers, rappers, all sorts of folks. It's a great conversation. It's a lot of fun, and I can't recommend it enough. And then within that feed, we also have a sub-series called Side Quests, where each episode is a 10 to 15-minute episode about with a different host, every episode talking about a game they love and why they love it. Josh has done 2 episodes, one on Donkey Kong 64 and the other on Power Pete. And now I think I'm going to harass Phil after this to please do an Alan Wake episode, if nothing else, to give another place where folks can hear that incredible story and how much this game means to you. But I love doing that series. It's literally a place for people to talk about a game they love and why they love it. And Jeff coined the phrase that we often say on the podcast, which is every video game is somebody's favorite. Good, bad, doesn't matter. Every video game is somebody's favorite, and we want to tell those stories. The other show I do very briefly is the show's not brief. I'll keep this brief, although I'm already failing. It's called Reignite. It started as a Mass Effect podcast, and after we finished the Mass Effect trilogy, then we did Andromeda, which I hadn't played, but my co-host did. And then after finishing that, we moved over to Dragon Age. It started as a show where we created our own versions of Shepard and made choices as if we would make them, and discussed why we made those choices. And then more importantly, talked about the aliens we romanced and why we fell in love with them, the most important part about an RPG. And then now we've pivoted to Dragon Age. Season 5 was Dragon Age Origins. Now we're in Dragon Age 2. And for the first time in the history of the run of the show, we are current with the news cycle, because there's a brand new Dragon Age as of when we're recording coming out in the fall. And we've been discussing that as well as that develops. So if you love games about storytelling and hearing personal touches on that storytelling, and more importantly, which characters we want to romance, it's a great show to listen to. I am the former freelance editor of the Game Informer show that unfortunately ended recently, but there is a huge backlog of weekly episodes talking about the news cycle and all the cool stuff coming. So if you're feeling nostalgic about this year or previous years and want to go check that out, you can still do that. And then I'm also a DJ sometimes. So yeah, that's me.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Now, Phil, over to you. Where can the good people find you online? What would you like to promote? And to hear more of, like, I understand not all of your episodes are going to involve such a personal touch, but if people want to hear your Alan Wake episode or any of your other rambling or any of your other thoughts on games, where can they find you?
It's okay. Sometimes it is rambling, I have to admit. But yeah, you can find me at Deleted Saves Podcast. I'm on pretty much wherever you can get fine podcasts sold, Apple, Spotify, web browsers, pretty much everywhere you go, it's Deleted Saves Podcast. You can find me at Deleted Saves Podcast on Twitter. I will always call it Twitter. I know it's called X, but fuck Elon Musk. I
No,
would rather.
it's fucking Twitter. Fuck him.
It's Twitter. It's fuck him. It's Twitter. I am on Blue Sky, and it's again Deleted Saves Podcast, no underscores. Let's see, where else am I at? I do have a Patreon. I'm pretty cheap. I'm like literally $1 if you want to go like Deleted Saves Podcast. You don't have to, but sometimes I do like have specialty episodes that I drop that I don't put in my main feed. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But I appreciate it nonetheless. I appreciate anyone who's willing to listen to what I do. Yes, I am on Instagram. I'm also Deleted Saves there. I haven't been using it as much, but it does still exist. Speaking of Game Informer, again, as much as I have been critical of sometimes how professional game writers and reviewers do their thing, for many years, Game Informer was my go-to for news on the games upcoming, the business, the industry. And I would like to shout out, for those of you who know, I watched the entire Overblood Super Replay group that was on Facebook, and I guess now on Reddit. I was in there one of the first days. I remember that Super Replay was goddamn hilarious when Reichert and Tim Turry and Reiner and all the guys definitely doing in that one. So those of you who know, shout out to all of you. You were the real ones. And that's pretty much me. I do still write on occasion. I still draw. In the future, hopefully, I'll be able to promote that stuff if I can ever get it out the door. If I'm not busy taking care of cats or dealing with anything else, I'm working on it, but we'll get there. But otherwise, if you want to listen to more of my show, it's Deleted Saves, and that's where I am.
I highly recommend all of the shows mentioned here. All are fantastic, so please go check out their shows and support them. As for myself, as per usual, you can follow me on social media at most places at Still Loading Pod, Twitter, Facebook, Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram, and Twitch at Still Loading Pod, at Still Loading Podcast on YouTube. If you want to support the show, please consider giving it a 5-star rating and review. It helps more people find it, and it pleases the algorithm gods. What were the dudes? Thor and what was it from this game again? The brothers.
Odin.
Thor and Odin. It's those algorithm gods, Thor and Odin. It pleases Thor and Odin. And it makes me feel warm and fuzzy, and I like feeling warm and fuzzy. You can also support the show over on Patreon, patreon.com/stillloadingpod. Lots of extra goodies over there. For $1 a month, you'll get all the episodes a little bit earlier, along with patron voting rights, and the episodes that are released earlier are at a higher bit rate. For $3 a month, you get everything prior, plus access to patron shoutouts, which you would have heard Matt in the shoutouts for this at the beginning of this episode. So that's $3 a month. For $4 a month, everything prior plus 2 mini bonus episodes. And for $5 a month, you get everything plus access to my monthly movie podcast, which I guess this is coming out in September. So the movie for this month is going to be No Time to Die, the final episode of Still Bonding. And then there'll be one more Still Bonding episode kind of wrapping everything up. And then we'll start Still Family, the monthly Fast and Furious podcast. Can't wait for that. So, but that's it. Patreon.com/stillloadingpod. But that's it. That's all the time I got for you for this episode of Still Loading. Thank you all so much for joining me. Matt, Phil, thank you as well for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it as always.
And with all that said, listeners, I will see you all next time.